Okay, welcome to World Regional Geography again. We're going to be introducing North America today. We'll be talking about the physical geography, the population geography, a little bit of the economic and cultural geography of the region. Make sure that you have read through these chapters in your text. Okay, North America, as you can see from this slide, from a physical standpoint, consists of a series of mountains, intermontane basins, and the broad floodplain that is dominated by the Mississippi River. One of the major features that you'll notice to the north and east is the Canadian Shield. This represents the oldest portion of North America, and as a geologic feature is incredibly flat and in many respects is very resource rich. Much younger in the center of the continent is the North American orogeny, the North American Cordillera, which is centered on the Rocky Mountains. Between the Rocky Mountains, very young, and the Appalachians in the east, fairly old, of course, is the Mississippi River drainage. This drainage represents the major waterway within North America. In addition to the Mississippi drainage, again, which we can see concentrating beginning in upper Minnesota and Wisconsin and draining into the Gulf of Mexico, we also, of course, have the Great Lakes. It's the largest freshwater body system in the world, and for North America represents a significant freshwater resource as well as a very important navigation route and resource. The population of North America is, of course, centered in the eastern portion of this very important world region. You can see from this visualization, which in fact is what we call a night lights visualization, that the majority of the U.S. population exists east of the Rocky Mountains, concentrated again in the east coast and in the Great Lakes region. Canada, very similarly, has the majority of its population in the east, but in addition, you'll notice that it is concentrated within a very short distance from the U.S.-Canadian border. It's often said that 90% of the Canadian population resides within 100 miles of the U.S.-Canadian border. Today, as you can see, approximately 306 million people in the United States, 34 million people in Canada. There are several characteristics of the population in North America that are worth considering, and especially since this is our first region we'll be discussing, I want to point out what the terms mean and what they translate into in terms of overall population. So if we look again at the two regions on this slide, you'll notice first of all, again, this concentration of population density in the eastern portion of the United States and largely in the eastern portion of Canada, although the prairie provinces towards the center of the country certainly have a large population density along the U.S. border. Now, when we also talk about population change, one of the numbers that's very important is the rate of natural increase. And remember, we talked about this last time. The rate of natural increase is the ratio between the crude birth rate and the crude death rate. And anytime that number is positive, it means that the population is growing. The closer that number is to zero, the lower, slower that rate of growth will be. So you notice that Canada has a growth rate of natural increase of approximately 0.4, and the United States has a rate, a rate of natural increase of approximately 0.6. The rate of natural increase is often augmented by immigration rates. So if we consider, for example, Canada, whose rate of natural increase, that is based on birth, is at 0.4, its actual rate of growth is closer to 0.9. What that really translates then into a doubling time, or the time in which Canada's population needs to double its total, is about 77 years. Now, the rate of natural increase is a very raw number. We also talk about the total fertility rates. And remember, total fertility rates are the number of children on average that a woman in the population has during her fertile years. And you'll notice that Canada has a rate of approximately 1.6 and the US has a rate of 2.1. Again, what this means is that these populations essentially have a replacement rate or slightly below. We can also examine the age structure of populations in the United States and Canada, and we see a couple of things. First of all, if you look to the left, the population pyramid for the United States, clearly we see that the population is substantially larger than that of Canada on the right. But what we also see is that the overall shape of the pyramid suggests relatively stable population growth in the United States. That is, the base of the pyramid is roughly equivalent to its shoulders, and then it slopes in towards the old age. In contrast, if we look at Canada, we notice that the base of the pyramid is actually somewhat inverted. That is, that it's smaller in the youngest age groups and then goes out towards the middle age groups and then again declines towards the higher ages. This is also consistent with what we saw in terms of the total fertility rates. The relatively stable population of North America has often been viewed as a very favorable aspect of and for its economy. When we talk about the economies and economic geography of North America, it's important to remember that these are highly developed economies. And for the most part, the United States economy, while it does have a significant agricultural and manufacturing base, is primarily centered in the tertiary sectors of the economies. That is, economies that are based on technology, research and development, and service components. While these are very important in Canada, Canada remains an important primary economy. That is, it produces a significant portion of the world's timber, significant mining resources, and of course significant mineral resources. And when we talk about the overall economies of North America, the United States and Canada represent two of the world's largest and wealthiest economies. I want to introduce a series of maps here that you'll see throughout the rest of the semester. And these are what we call cartograms, and that is the shape of an area and its size relative to other areas is indicated by how much it's inflated or enlarged. And so in this map from the World Mapper organization, what we see is wealth in GDP with purchasing power parity indicated. Remember that purchasing power parity is a means of expressing how efficiently currency in a given country can purchase the essentials of life. So while it may cost $3 to buy a hamburger in the United States, it might cost somewhat less in Ireland. Therefore, the purchasing power parity is adjusted. But when we look at overall wealth, even when considering purchasing power parity, we see that the general GDP of the United States far outweighs much of the world, and we can see that Canada is by no means at the same level, but very high. All right, we're also going to look at several of the components of the economies, economic geography of North America. And one of the ways we want to look at this is to look at some of the more traditional sectors. In this case, we're looking at cereal exports. That is the various cereal grains that are produced agriculturally throughout the world. And it's very easy to see that the United States is the leader in cereal grain production throughout the world. We also note that Canada is actually quite large in this area. And this is, again, primarily due to the agricultural production in the Midwest and into the prairie provinces of west central Canada. These grains and the agricultural sector has become incredibly industrialized in North America. While we are the world's largest producers, relatively few individuals in the United States are actually employed in this area. Okay, in a similar manner, we can look at wood and pulp paper exports. What we mean by that is the amount of wood commodities in both timber and paper pulp that are exported by country. And in this case, we can see the absolute dominance of Canada on the world market. You can see that Europe produces a significant quantity, and there's an increasing amount of paper pulp produced in South America and Indonesia. But world timber production absolutely is dominated by the Canadian forestry sector. And it is important to see that this is part of a very developed, very technologically advanced economy. When we look at the technology sector of the world, and this is represented by earnings from licensing and royalties, and so really what this represents is economy's production in terms of earnings from non-material goods. What we can see is that the United States absolutely dominates this from a global standpoint. You can certainly see that in Europe there is some successful licensing that goes on, but nothing that compares to the amount of earnings that occur in the United States. And the U.S. economy, while it still has significant economies from industry and agriculture, it is absolutely true that our tertiary economy dominates the total overall earnings. In wrapping up North America, there are a couple of key ideas that I want you to examine when you are reading the text. Now, the first of these is the question of immigration and the North American Free Trade Agreement. Today, many people in the United States are concerned with both legal and illegal immigration and the relationship that this has to the development and success of our economy. So what we know is immigration and free trade are intimately tied. We also know that the current recession that's affecting the world is in fact tied to the U.S. economy. And one of those is the housing bubble and the question of housing in the United States. We know that the housing bubble in the United States had a significant impact on world economies, and it's very important to look at how housing and vacant housing in the United States is evolving over the last several years. We're also going to look at the question of aging in North America and the question of the natural gas industry. I introduced the question of population, aging, and housing because the next discussion that you will be working on will be based on an online resource called the American Esri Atlas. And in that, you're going to be looking at questions of population change through time, age demographics in the United States, the housing market and vacant housing, and a couple of other factors. And so the slide that you're looking at right now is simply one example of that resource. Finally, today I want to introduce the question of natural gas and resources in North America. One of the advantages that North America has, both the United States and Canada, is its vast resource wealth. And in recent years, this resource wealth has taken a new form, and that is the extraction of unconventional natural gas and oil from shale beds. And as you can see in this slide, the North American shale resources extend throughout the eastern portion of the United States and into central Canada. And it's important as you do your reading to consider how this very extensive and very valuable resource may change North America.